Hello everyone, so today I'm going to be reading chapter 4 of A Cup of Kindness. Friggin' finally. I'm so sorry that this took me so long to get out. I've just kind of neglected it, but this is a good story and I do want to finish it. So yeah, I will link Icypanther's Ao3 in the description so you guys can go check out their other works because they are seriously an amazing author and you should all check them out and go see their other works because chef's kiss. Anyways, let's just get started. Also, sorry that I sound weird. I'm currently sick, so yeah. Anyways, let's just get started. Keith awoke to someone gently shaking his shoulder. He jolted up with a hoarse shout, arms lashing out to strike, heart roaring in his ears and breath lodged in his throat, and there was no attacker. No foster sibling or group home orphan playing a prank. Instead, a man with a bright orange mustache and a surprised expression was standing above him, hands raised, palm out, to show that he was no threat. Karan. Keith's brain latched onto the name. Karan from the coffee shop, who had let Keith sleep on his couch, and Keith had apparently slept through the entire night, and now tried to attack Karan, who had woken him up just as he said he would. Keith felt his entire face color. Sorry, he choked out, voice hoarse and rough from sleep, and the words stuck in his throat. God, he had not just done that. What was Karan even thinking? Karan only smiled at him. No need for that, lad. Did you sleep well? Keith nodded, at least capable of that, and he was truthful, too. I'm glad to hear it. I'm going to start us a quick breakfast. Any requests for your eggs? Keith's mind came to a halt. What? Karan was feeding him breakfast? But he should be going. Customers were going to be arriving, and Keith, Karan said gently, how would you like your eggs? Scrambled? Keith said the first thing that came to mind. It was accurate. His brain fart scrambled, too. Very good. Why don't you freshen up, and I should have these done in a few minutes? Keith nodded again. Karan bustled over to the counter and went into the door behind it, while Keith slowly pushed the blankets off and sat up, gathering up his clothes he'd folded yesterday, the box of toiletries, and shuffled for the bathroom. When he emerged, dressed back in his own clothes that had him wincing as they were dirty and sort of smelly, Karan had a hot plate of eggs sitting on a table for him, along with a cup of orange juice and fresh strawberries, although the man was nowhere to be seen, probably getting ready for work. Keith sat down and slowly ate the hot meal, savoring every bite. He didn't know when he'd get another one. Karan had shown him kindness, but just like the park, he couldn't expect to stay here forever. Although Keith shuffled his feet beneath the table, he hadn't slept that soundly since he could remember. Hadn't felt as safe as he had last night, and he knew it wasn't just the coffee shop and his cheerful decor that made him feel that way. Karan had made him feel safe, made him feel cared for in a way he hadn't felt since before Pop had, but his cheeks flushed. He couldn't expect Karan to just let him stay here because he wanted to. He had a business to run, and Keith was technically a runaway, and he didn't want to get Karan in trouble. He had to go. After breakfast, maybe Karan would let him take some food and water with him. Possibly, he winced, even give him some money for a bus fare, and Keith would go somewhere. California, maybe. He could work on a farm there. He didn't mind hard work, even if working on a farm wasn't what he dreamed for himself, and they wouldn't care he wasn't legally old enough, and disappear off the grid until he turned 18, where the state no longer had any power over him. School was important, but he was so far behind anyway with how often he moved homes that it didn't really matter. He could read, write, and do basic math, and that was enough. Even though Keith knew that this plan wouldn't make him happy, but it would keep him safe, and at the end of the day, that was what mattered. He finished his eggs and drank his juice, carrying the dishes over to the front counter, and after a thought, going behind the low swinging door to put them in the sink there, because Karan had given him permission to go to the fridge, which meant he had to be allowed to go behind the counter. He'd go fold up the blankets in Karan's pajamas, put the pillows back where he found them, and then go find Karan to say goodbye. The inner door to the kitchen swung open, and a no-nonsense, dark blue-haired young woman hurried out, shouting over her shoulder, "The third time, Karan. I know you don't want to, but if he won't show up for his shifts, then you have to let him go. We can't keep—" Oh! She broke off as she spotted Keith, frozen by the sink, and her eyes narrowed in on his bruises. Sorry, Keith mumbled, stepping out of her way, ducking his head to hide it. Ah, Keith! Karan sounded from behind the woman, relief dripping from his voice. There you are. Tell me, lad, what do you know about making coffee? Keith flicked between the woman and Karan. It uses beans and has a filter. Perfect, Karan cheered. Aksha, meet your replacement Rolo. Karan, She turned wide eyes to him. You can't be serious. When am I ever not? Corinne smiled at her, and she just groaned. Keith has shown to be quite quick on the uptake, and I do not doubt his skills. Keith, is this all right with you? Just for a few hours, and I promise, Aksha is really quite a lovely young lady and an excellent trainer. Aksha rolled her eyes, but a small smile tugged up her lips, and Keith relaxed marginally. Keith wasn't quite sure, but it sounded like Corinne needed some help, and he didn't mind at all. He could try to repay Corinne for his kindness this way, and he nodded. Sure, I guess. Excellent, Corinne grinned at him before sobering and looking to Aksha. I will contact Rollo and let him know his employment is terminated. You are correct. It is not fair to either of us to continue to pick up his slack. If you'll excuse me. Aksha turned to him, hands on her hips. All right, kid, take off the jacket, grab an apron. She nodded to the small stand on the far wall. And listen up, we've got work to do. Keith held onto his jacket sleeve that hid the fingerprint bruises left from his foster father and the son's harsh grabs. And while Aksha frowned, her eyes were soft, as her gaze flicked back to his face, and Keith lowered his. Grab an apron, she repeated quieter, and Keith nodded and hurried to obey. Oh my god, these sentences are so long, I feel like I can't even breathe. Anyways. And just as Corinne had said, Aksha was a very good trainer. She was demanding, but she was patient and showed Keith exactly what he needed to do and didn't yell when he did mess up. And so while Aksha handled the front counter and Corinne doctored up the cups, Keith poured and brewed coffee and pulled pastries as directed out of the display case he'd helped Aksha stock from a delivery. Oh my god. Piping hot and fresh by a truck detailed with Lila's home-baked goods, and Corinne had insisted Keith try his favorite muffin of cranberry orange before the morning rush had begun. And while the stream of customers, a lot of college students, a lot of people dressed for business and work, was steady, he was kept busy, Keith found that he was enjoying himself. The customers were all nice and pleasant, and many were clearly regulars, and while he'd felt a few eyes landing on him and staring, they said nothing, and it was strangely fulfilling to fill the cups of coffee, to complete orders, and have people tell him thank you as he handed them their orders. Corinne told him he was welcome to any of the beverages, and he could help himself to anything if he was hungry. The hours flew by, small lulls filled by changing out trash bags and restocking coffee beans, and Corinne showing him how to make the s'mores hot chocolate, and then as they grew closer to the afternoon, beginning to heat up vats of soup, and Keith got a tour of the small kitchen in the back where they made sandwiches, grilled cheeses, and 2 different paninis, and stored the soup. They would get a small wave right around 1, Corinne said, as Galaxy Garrison University students liked to visit the shop for lunch, and it was just a few blocks from campus, and classes on Friday let out at 12:30. But the afternoons were typically quieter, and Corinne ran the shop himself, with only another GGU student like Aksha, who served as the rest of his staff. But right now, in this quiet spot, it was time for a break. Keith was instructed to take a seat, and Corinne heated his sandwich up on the stove and served it to Keith alongside more fruit. To his surprise, it wasn't Corinne who came over, though, while he was eating, cleaning up the front counter and manning it for any customers who trickled in, but Aksha, carrying a bright orange mug in her hands, and to his alarm, she dumped it out on the table. But she wasn't spilling coffee. Money? Never seen a tip jar, kid? She asked him, dropping into the seat across from him. It's not a tip jar, Corinne hollered from across the room where he was at the counter, and Aksha rolled her eyes. A cup of kindness, she loudly corrected, and Keith stifled a laugh, as he had found himself doing several times that morning at the banter between the two. He liked it here. He really did like it here. He sobered, though, because he knew he couldn't stay. He turned his attention back to Aksha as she began to sort the money into 2 equal piles. A few minutes later, she shoved one of the piles at him. Keith blinked. I don't. Corinne won't take the tips, she said, and you more than earned your half. Take it. Keith reached out, a definitely not shaking hand, as he pulled the bills and change, around $15 by a quick glance, and more money than he'd ever had in his entire life, towards him. And now he didn't have to ask Corinne for a bus fare. This would at least get him a little ways out of town. Thank you, he said quietly, unable to meet her eyes. See you around, kid. She stood up, and Keith gave a start, then scolded himself for even thinking anything of it, because it was just a common goodbye. It meant nothing. Louder, she called. Corinne, see you Sunday. Good luck on that exam today, my dear, Corinne called back, before turning to the customers who had walked in. Keith returned his attention to his sandwich, eating it slowly. The bell tinkled above the shop as the most recent patrons walked out several minutes later. A few more dotted about the shop, but otherwise quiet. He heard Corinne approaching. An envelope entered Keith's sight line as Corinne took the seat Aksha had vacated. For you, Corinne bobbed it as Keith stared, not sure what was going on, and he took it. His eyes widened. The envelope was full of money. Your wages for today, Corinne said cheerfully, although as Keith pulled his gaze from the envelope, a little over $60, there was something more serious in his expression. And I thank you tremendously for assisting on such short notice and doing such an excellent job. Keith, though, shook his head. This was too much. The tips were one thing. This was, I can't. Keith. Corinne's voice was gentle, and he just as gently pushed the envelope back where Keith was holding it back out. You earned that, lad. And if Corinne insisted, and it wasn't charity but for his work, even though Keith would have been happy to work for free to pay Corinne back for his kindness, Keith slowly put the tip money into the envelope, too, and folded it in half and put it in his jacket pocket. And now he should be going. He had enough money now, more than enough, to go somewhere. He'd lingered long enough, and now he just had to say goodbye. He'd never said goodbye in his goodbye before, not like this. He peeked up through his bangs. Thank you, and thank you for everything. His throat felt treacherously tight, and Keith swallowed. I should be going now. And to where are you going? Corinne asked, tone light, but as Keith risked another look up, he saw that Corinne's eyes were serious. Keith gave a small shrug. If I might offer a suggestion, Corinne said, and Keith nodded. If you are going somewhere, and it does not turn out to be the right place, you can always go somewhere else. But if you are running from something, Corinne said quietly, wherever you go, it will never be the right place. Keith ducked his head. Keith was running. He was going nowhere, but where could he go? The bell tinkled above the door with new customers. Please, Corinne said quietly, think on this. And if you wish to go, then please, allow me to give you a lift to either a train or bus station after work. Is that all right? Keith's eyes felt hot, and he hurriedly blinked, but he nodded. Okay, he could at least wait till then. Good, Corinne said, and his relief was clear. Keith faintly wondered why Corinne seemed to care so much. He wondered why no one in the system had ever been like this. Please, enjoy the afternoon then, Corinne said. There are plenty of books if you like reading, and there is a lovely little walking trail 2 blocks down from here if you fancy some fresh air. You know where the soups are and sandwich supplies. Please, help yourself. He rose to his feet, and his hand hovered for all of a second before he sent Keith another smile, a tad tight, and hurried to the counter while greeting the new patrons. Keith remained at the table, hands curled now on his lap to try and stop him from trembling. That hadn't gone as planned. Nothing involving Corinne seemed to. But as Keith slowly stood, heading for the bookshelf to find something to read, he decided that maybe that wasn't such a bad thing.